Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is Adam Goodman, partner at Ballard Partners. Adam, so good to see you once again.
Great to be with you. Another week of primaries looms and another assortment of permutations.
Exactly. And like you said, every few weeks I do bring you on and you give us some insight into the state of the 2024 race. Today is no different as we sit here right now. We are on the eve of Super Tuesday. And over the weekend, we saw Nikki Haley win the DC primaries. So my first question to you is, what does this mean for the rest of the race?
All the money that's gone behind her now yielded at least a few delegates, right, in one win. I mean, it's going to go down as a footnote in history. I mean, it's nice to hear that she's the first woman to ever win a Republican primary in the history of the party and of the nation. That's a very cool thing. But she now faces the grim truth, right? Some would say the grim political reaper, because she has one contest coming up actually Monday in North Dakota, which she's not favored to do well in, and then of course Super Tuesday, which may be a super loss across the board for her. I think the closest major state right now, if you look at the polls, is Virginia. I saw she's within maybe 8-9 points of the former president. Most likely she will lose all of Super Tuesday contests, and what that means is you're now looking at the possibility that on or around the 19th of March, the Republicans effectively will have their nominee because Trump will have scored what he needed to score for delegates. So, yes, it's nice that Nikki, I'm glad for her supporters that she notched a win, but it's going to be like Haley's Comet. Right? It comes every 77 years. So she had her Haley's Comet moment in Washington, D.C. over the weekend, but unfortunately, she's probably not going to see the comet coming her way again for a very long time.
That's some tough criticism. Footnote in history, the political grim reaper. So what you're saying is you think the GOP primary is effectively over. Do you think it's now a general election race?
It is, but what's really going to be maybe interesting, I say maybe because there are all sorts of qualifiers around it. Will there be an effective alternative that's put into play? No Labels obviously has been getting a lot of press in the last couple of months. Do they actually come up with a ticket that would go into the A versus B formula that would make it A, B, and C? What I'm hearing from the insiders is there is going to be something very soon forthcoming from them, and apparently they're very excited about it. I thought at one point that would be possibly a Nikki Haley-led No Labels ticket, possibly with a Kristen Sinema, the U.S. Senator from Arizona, as her ticket mate. She has said in every which way possible she's not interested. So taking her at her word, the most logical two people that have any kind of name ID that I think present themselves are Chris Christie, who supposedly his handlers are talking now to No Labels, and possibly Mitt Romney. I mean, it sounds like a reach from the past, but Mitt has been not shy about taking on the way that the party has moved. I think he is looking at the end of his elected career, and maybe there's one more shot for him. So if No Labels, Brittany, actually does field a credible ticket, it will have impact potentially in this race. Can they win the presidency with a third party run? Highly unlikely. First of all, to get on enough state ballots to do that, they have to carry some states. Could they make a difference? And I don't like the word spoiler, but can they actually impact the final result between President Biden and Donald Trump? Absolutely.
Chris Christie, Mitt Romney, those are two Republicans, and two Republicans who have largely and publicly criticized the former president, Donald Trump. Do you think that if, let's say, that is an alternative, a third party alternative rather, would that help Biden or would that help Trump?
The great parlor guessing game in Washington is just that question. Who's it help and who's it hurt? If it actually kicks in and it's a big deal, like big deal meaning they get, say, 20% of the national vote or more and are somewhat competitive in a couple of states, we've never seen that, okay? You can go back to Ross Perot. Ross Perot at his height actually threatened the monopoly of Republican and Democrat control of the process, and then he faded away by the end. If there's actually kind of some power behind the third party movement, this will have an impact. I'm telling you, it's going to have an impact, especially you look at states like Wisconsin. That's right now, it'll always be like a 2, 3, 4 point margin head to head. But you put 2 or 3 or 4 people in, who knows? And then there's something else to consider. Everything you see, Brittany, out there, all the polling and everything you and I and everyone else is feeling says this is a change election. It's a change election. The wrong direction is decidedly wrong direction. The last polls show upwards of 70%, 7 out of 10 Americans think we're headed down the wrong path. That, and the president's, of course, numbers, is disapproval numbers are at near record levels. This is a change election. But what happens if you have more than one change alternative to the status quo? Looking at Biden as Joe Biden as the status quo, don't know. And that's where, I could spin a very, very good scenario for you about how that would help Donald Trump, and a compelling scenario and kind of mathematical equation about why it might actually help the president. All I can tell you, everyone's nervous. All the Republican and Democratic poobahs, they're nervous as heck. This is something that they don't know basically how to control or even assess. And so you're going to see attacks if No Labels becomes credible here. You're going to see attacks from both Republicans and Democrats, supporters of Democrats and Republicans, going right at No Labels because they want to take the X factor out of play early if they can. I'm just not sure they can do it when Americans and the mood of America is the way it is now.
Let's talk about recent polling, because a lot of polls right now show that in a head-to-head matchup, former President Donald Trump beats President Joe Biden by a slim margin, but still a margin. But in other polls, Nikki Haley is beating President Joe Biden by a wider margin. Why is this not resonating with GOP voters?
Because she hasn't been appealing enough to the base, appealing enough to go beyond their support for Donald Trump. This isn't a rejection of Nikki Haley as much as it is an embrace of Donald Trump within the Republican hierarchy, within the Republican base. And she's just finding that, and those are interesting to talk about. Oh, well, she actually has a bigger margin against Joe Biden in this state, in that state, or nationally. You're looking at something that will not happen. She will not be the Republican nominee for president in 2024. Could she have something ahead? Possibly, though I'd argue she's burning a lot of bridges on her way to certain defeat. But yes, I think if you look at this hypothetically, and Nikki Haley is less disapproved by the general electorate than the former president is, but it's a non-starter.
I am curious if you think in the primary season so far there have been any warning signs for former President Donald Trump, because in South Carolina we saw him beat Nikki Haley by 20 points, approximately 60% to 40%. But some people have said that 40% is a rebuke of Donald Trump. They will never vote for him in the general election. Do you see any truth to that?
I agree with your question up to the very end, which is, that means they never will vote for Donald Trump. That's not true. I think a lot of Republicans are conflicted, who are not big Trump supporters. But when you come down to it, Brittany, and it comes down to the real race between President Biden and Donald Trump, and possibly a third alternative, that's when the rubber meets the road. And the question is, will Republicans support Joe Biden over Donald Trump, given his lack of political standing, the dissatisfaction, I think, that many people have with his presidency? I think the answer ultimately is no. I think a lot of people won't be happy about being forced into that choice. A lot of people will make it not willingly. But I think the 40%, and by the way, 60-40, we're thinking, well, she got 40%. Here's the bigger headline there. She got 40% in her home state. She lost in her home state by 20 points. It was a huge win for Donald Trump. And you see some of the other numbers in other states across the country, they're beyond huge. They're beyond the word landslide. I'm not even sure what the word is. Annihilation. It's a political annihilation, right? So I don't see any real victory in your home state losing by 20 points on a one-on-one contest against somebody else. I think that is not something that you move forward with and say, oh, I did really well. I don't know how losing by 20 points factors into doing well.
How much do you think the issues matter in this election opposed to the candidates? For example, immigration, Republicans seem to be winning on that issue. Women's rights, Democrats do. So how much does that matter versus I want to vote for President Biden, I want to vote for former President Donald Trump?
Great question. So I think issues matter. I really do. I think they always matter. The political class tends to discount this, especially these days, and basically say it's all a popularity contest, right? Or it's a referendum on one person versus another, right? I think there's some major issues. The one that's got everyone's attention, I think is fair to say, right now is immigration. And there was a recent observation, which I actually concur with, which is if President Biden is kind of underwater on that issue versus Donald Trump by 20 points, there's an argument he could still win. But if he's 30 points underwater or more, he probably is done. Right now, I'm seeing polls showing he's 35 points below the mark against the former president on immigration, which I don't think has an easy fix. You saw him head for the border recently, as did Donald Trump, right? Dueling press conferences on the border. And I guarantee you're going to hear this from the president as he starts to move down the campaign trail. I think you're going to hear tougher language from President Biden on the border. But I'm not sure that that's going to be enough to curtail the perception America has that illegal immigration isn't now any longer just a Texas issue or an Arizona issue. It's an American issue. And you're seeing that in poll after poll, even in the heartland of America, where people are kind of freaking out. The other issue you mentioned is abortion. I think the Alabama ruling by the Supreme Court justice really rattled a lot of people, especially Republicans, frankly, which is why the legislature and Republicans in the Alabama legislature quickly rallied to try to legally protect women who are seeking IVF and trying to have children. And without that, the Alabama case, we'll call it, left unresolved, left unaddressed by Republicans, could have been a major issue, I think, in the national election. I think it's less of one now. It's still an issue, but I thank God, common sense, in my opinion, common sense prevailed over someone, basically was trying to communicate he was speaking for God.
You did mention at the top of that response there the dueling border trips, same-day trips from President Biden and former President Donald Trump. Do you think there were any winners and losers on that trip? Do you think it was performative? Did it move the needle in any way?
President Biden had to go to the border. He couldn't keep sending down, Vice President Kamala Harris and thinking he was doing something. He had to go there to show at least seriousness of intent. But he's got the burden of proof now. The Democrats will say, well, under President Trump, there are still a lot of issues with illegal immigration. Absolutely. But the issues have grown worse. When you talk about 3 million people, legal immigrants coming over the border in the last year under President Biden, that's the here and now. The referendum on legal immigration will be a referendum on the current administration's policies, not Donald Trump's. And I don't see any easy fix to this, any easy way to get out from underneath that. You've seen all the press that the governor of Texas has generated as he is trying to demand the front line at Eagle Pass, right, and elsewhere. But I think this is a real problem for President Biden without an easy solution.
As we sit here right now, like I did mention, we are a day out from Super Tuesday. When the results start coming in and we start analyzing them Tuesday night, Wednesday morning, what are you looking out for?
Well, first, I think we're all curious. Could Nikki Haley win somewhere? I think American Samoa is on for Super Tuesday. I think that's right. That's just out of curiosity, right? It doesn't really have much impact. Some will look at the margins, like as I said earlier in the interview, Virginia. There's some polls that are suggesting that Nikki Haley's within 10 points of the former president. That may be interesting, kind of parlor talk. But I think what you're going to have after Super Tuesday is former President Donald Trump with an insurmountable lead. And it'll only be a question of, does he wrap it up by Louisiana's primary, which I think is the next one to follow, or does he have to wait another week after that? In the month of March, the Republican Party will declare we have a nominee.
There doesn't seem, obviously, in this primary season, too much appetite for Nikki Haley. So what is her strategy here of staying in? Because other pollsters, other strategists I've talked to say the longer she stays in, the less of a political future she has. So what do you make of this?
I totally agree with that point of view. I think she's burned every Republican bridge behind her. She's doing that by the day. I thought that maybe there was a strategy behind it. The strategy was that she's maybe setting herself up for a third party run. She has sounded somewhat independent of late. And I thought that was all very purposeful, potentially, but clearly not. And the idea that Nikki Haley can kind of soldier on, lose all of these races, and then in 2028, when there would be a potential opening for her to run again, that somehow memories will be short. I don't buy that. Memories will be long, especially in the core of the base, and they're going to remember how she refused to step aside for the former president, and I don't think that augurs well for a future within the party. Now, her future somewhere else in some other fashion, that's where the parlor game and conversation will come into play. It'll be fascinating to talk about, but I think what she's done is she's effectively ended her chances of being a major Republican nominee for the Republican Party for president.
Super Tuesday is always an exciting night to cover, an exciting night to watch on the news. But I am curious, I mean, you're effectively saying her presidential run is dead in the water. Does the results of this Super Tuesday even matter?
It does if she can show that there's any life, right, under the sea. But most likely, there's going to be no life. And I think, I would argue that a lot, and Democrats have argued this too, Brittany, that who were concerned about President Biden and thought that he should have stepped aside and allowed others within the party to run in 24. There's a sense of stubbornness or hubris, I think, that's attached to that. I would say the same thing would be in play here with Nikki Haley, because I can't explain her, if I don't understand her strategy, and if there is no strategy other than to soldier on, why she's still doing this. She's doing this to protest against Donald Trump, who she served, of course, as U.S. ambassador, and said great things about, and said, of course, publicly, months ago, she would support the Republican nominee for president, whoever that is. So what's the reason for this other than hubris and stubbornness on her side of the ledger?
And it seems like she walked that back this weekend or over the past few days, too. She initially said it, and now she's walking it back. So a lot remains to be seen over the next few days. Per usual, Adam, thank you so much for breaking it down. I'm already looking forward to our next conversation.
Same here. Be good, Brittany.